Dream11 CEO Harsh Jain tells CNBC TV18 that the company is always in conversation with investors for further fundraising. He expects early-stage investors to exit the company. Adds that it is fair to assume that they are talking to large tech investors in India and that the future fundraising will be via the secondary route. Edtech Startup LEAD School raises $28 million in third round of funding led by Westbridge Capital. The capital will be used to accelerate development and rollout of new products, increase school network in Tier 2-3 cities, and hire talent across domains. UK's publicly owned impact investor CDC Group commits $10 million in Chiratae Ventures Fund 4 to support the growth of early-stage tech-enabled startups in India. Flipkart enters into a strategic partnership with Nepal's e-commerce platform Sasto Deal to indicate cross-border trade opportunities for its sellers. Sasto Deal will now host products from Flipkart marketplace sellers. The Parliamentary Panel on Information Technology, led by Shashi Tharoor, summons Facebook's executive to appear before it on the 2nd of September. The panel plans to discuss allegations that the social media platform has been misused and its hate speech policy has applied selectively. News organizations join the group of companies pushing Apple for more favorable terms of App Store. Write a letter to Tim Cook asking what it would take for them to get better deal terms, which would allow them to keep more money from digital subscriptions sold through Apple's App Store. Well, those were the headlines we were tracking for you today on What's Brewing. We will check in with Dream11, India's only gaming unicorn that has won the new title sponsor rights for Indian Premier League 2020 for 222 crore rupees. That's nearly 50% discount from the 440 crores that the earlier title sponsor, which is a Chinese smartphone maker, Vivo, was paying for the same period. Earlier this month, Vivo pulled out of this year's commitment. CNBC TV18's Shireen Bhan caught up with the company's CEO and co-founder Harsh Jain, who says that while the company is looking forward to expanding its offering and client base, it is well capitalized and may not need to hunt for further investors anytime soon. Listen in to this exclusive conversation.
No, so as you very well know, that we prefer not to talk about market speculation. And, at this stage and scale of the company, I believe that at any point of time, we will be in talks with some investors worldwide for a primary or a secondary, hopefully more of the latter, as the company matures and is not a burn company, right? And so I think at any point of time, we're having these conversations, and there's a lot of market speculation. I can point to like every month of the last year, someone talking about a fundraising that's eminently happening, right? And I think that I'll just let that stay as it is.
So is a fundraise imminent or not?
It's always imminent and it's never happening.
Can you confirm on who is looking at exiting? Reports suggest that Kalari and multiple are looking at an exit. Is that accurate?
So I think it's the responsibility of our early stage investors to also return money to their LPs, right? And Kalari Capital, Think Investments, Multiples Equity, all were very early investors in Dream11. So as the company matures and their life cycle of their fund from which they invested in us comes to an end, of course, they will continuously try to sell some secondary shares to return capital to their shareholders. And we're more than happy to provide them some great returns when they do.
Okay, there's a whole bunch of names that have been doing the rounds. So you can tell me if I'm hot or cold on the track of which companies that you're speaking to. The most recent reports seem to suggest that you're in talks with Tiger Global. Previous reports have talked about TPG and others. So are these the companies that you're speaking with? Are these the investors that you're speaking with?
Well, I can say that, some of these investors are the names, the kind of names floating around and the ones that have been linked to us are basically all of them, right? All of the names that have invested in the Indian tech ecosystem have been linked to us, I think, in the last 6 months itself. So I would say that it's fair to assume that it's our responsibility to have a conversation with any great Indian tech investor, and the names you suggested, I would be fortunate to have some of them on our cap table.
Okay, okay. Harsh, let me end then by asking, and I'm going to go back again to the 10-cent issue. Given the kind of sentiment, the backlash at this point in time, are you in active conversation, discussion to see whether there can be the possibility of them bringing down their stake further in the company?
I think we'll wait and comply with whatever the government regulations are, whatever the government of India deems fit. You know, a lot of times private companies are slightly ostracized because our funding and our investors are more public, right? But there are Chinese investors in almost all the public companies in India as well, right? Either directly in the public markets or through funds which have LPs as Chinese investors. But I don't think that matters. I think what matters is that we will all comply. And I, for one, can speak about Dream11 and Dream Sports. We will comply with whatever direction the government of India wants us to take.
Well, that was Dream11, and we will be bringing you more details very soon right here on CNBC TV18. Now, Bengaluru-based space tech startup Pixel recently raised $5 million in seed round of funding. Its founders, 22-year-old space enthusiasts and BITS Pilani graduates, are planning to launch Pixel's first satellite by the end of this year. They believe that space technology can make the Earth a better and more sustainable space. To know how and what is the road ahead for this startup, my colleague Shruti Mishra caught up with Pixel founders Awais Ahmed and Kishtu Khandelwal. Take a look at this conversation.
Gentlemen, many thanks for joining us on Startup Street today. Awais, let me start with you first. You are aiming to provide a real-time 24/7, 365 coverage of full planetary data through a constellation of Earth imaging small satellites that you're building. Tell me more about it, and what is the larger issue you're trying to solve?
Thanks for having us here, Shruti. So in terms of what we are doing at Pixel, the goal is simple: to cover the Earth with enough satellites so that we're able to track changes happening across the planet every day, be it crop health across farmlands, across geographies, or natural gas or oil leakages, or even air pollution levels or water pollution levels. We want to be able to put enough satellites up there so that we can get information-rich data to help us keep track of the health of the planet, sort of like a pulse monitor for the Earth. When we started, Kshitij and I, we were studying in Rajasthan, and there were a couple of problems we had first-hand seen, be it illegal mining in Rajasthan or air pollution being a rampant problem in Gurgaon and Delhi. And we thought satellite imagery would be a potent way or a potent data set to be able to solve this. But the problem we realized when we worked with existing data was that it was not good enough in information to be able to tackle this. The data couldn't even see certain problems, which is why we decided, we would solve the more fundamental issue, providing the data that will sort of help make Earth more sustainable.
Okay, all right. Kshitij, coming to you now. You recently raised $5 million in seed funding from Bloom Ventures, Growek Ventures, and Lightspeed India. What do you plan to do with the funds?
Build satellites, of course. But yes, we've got 2 satellites in the pipeline, one that's scheduled for a launch later this year. We've got 1 more coming up for middle of next year. With the funds, we will be able to do the development of these satellites. We'll also be able to set up infrastructure for integration as well as testing of these missions. So the funds will allow us to do that. In addition, we are also working on making sense of the satellite data that we're getting. So setting up infrastructure for data analytics, working with geospatial data, that's also where we will deploy our funds.
Okay, Kshitij, following on that, the new funding, like you said, strengthens your plans for the launch of your first satellite that is scheduled to launch by end of this year. So how many satellites are you planning really to launch to achieve your global constellation?
Sure. So the idea is that the first phase of constellation will be around 30 satellites. To start with, we'll go with 2, and then we will move on to deploying the entire constellation by the end of 2022.
So Kshitij, take me through the specifics of the microsatellites you're manufacturing. I believe they only weigh close to 15 kilos.
The first satellite is 15 kilograms. The second one, we are upgrading it to be almost double the size. These are as small as a mini refrigerator. And as far as the design process goes, it's a year-long process, almost a year-long process, where we've optimized it to start from conceptualization to different stages of design, then procurement of different components, manufacturing, then we move on to assembly, integration, testing, and finally the big day comes when we launch these satellites, so we get them ready for launch and ship them to the launch site. As far as the specifications go, we have compact high-fidelity cameras that allow us to take images of the Earth in multiple spectral bands. And in addition to that, we also are looking at updating the capability of these satellites to have a higher downlink, so we can beam down more images.
Okay. Now, the Indian government recently announced to set up in-space and also privatized space. With COVID-19 too, we're seeing imagery demand shift really, very fast from drones and airplanes to now satellites. What is the kind of potential awareness you see going forward?
Now, as you rightly said, the COVID has, I think, increased that acceleration towards adoption of satellite imagery because travel has been curtailed quite a bit. A lot of our customers have multiple assets that they need to track across different countries, and with travel being an issue now, satellite imagery is the way to go. You'll still need to have people if you're operating drones. You'll still need to have people if you're operating airplanes, and it seems counterintuitive, but actually the price that you will pay through drones or airplanes is actually much higher than if you would through satellite imagery.
Now, Kshitij, take me through some of the companies you've tied up with to partner in India's growth through space technology. What are the projects you're working on currently, and what are you hoping to achieve through these partnerships?
Sure. Our goal at Pixel is to build from India for the world, and we also want to develop a very strong partner ecosystem to work with. Most of our partners are classified into two divisions. There's partners on the satellite side, where we procure different components for the satellite. There are a lot of Indian partners who are very excited to work with us. We also have a bunch of global partners who supply us with components. And for a few things like your ground stations, we require global partners with access to very good ground stations. As far as data analytics goes, we have partnered with companies like Satsure and SkyMet here in India. And we're also looking at a lot of global partnerships to work with, which basically allows us to create sense from the data and to make use of this data for applications in agriculture, energy, and other sectors.
Okay. Aves, before I let you go, take me through the revenue model that you've devised for the venture to make it sustainable and, of course, gradually profitable.
So there's a two-pronged method there. One is, we will beam down these images from our satellites, and we give access to companies or organizations around the world to these images. They can take these images, do whatever they want with it. The other aspect of it is, making it easier for them to use this data, which is where the software as a service platform comes in. They can just log into their browser, go to our website, and be able to, keep a track, for example, their farms from sowing of the seed to when the yield happens, how the soil health is, what time should they sow their seeds at, what the yield is going to be, and even prediction of that. Or oil and gas companies can keep a track of long pipelines through the software platform. So it is a two-pronged way. If people just want images, we just give them the images, but we also build the tools which makes it easy for anyone to take this data and extract insights out of it. We're just taking it from only geospatial developers or people with experience who can work with satellite imagery and trying to open it for anyone with the basic knowledge of using a computer and software to be able to take this data and use it for their own analysis.
Okay. Now, my last question to you, I understand your first satellite is scheduled to launch by end of this year, but what are the future plans? Any new partnerships that you're looking to, make? What can we expect in the next 6 to 8 months?
So in the next 6 months, I think the biggest thing is India's first private Earth imaging satellite launch, and one-of-a-kind satellite as well, and that's coming up fairly soon. But following that, the focus will be on deploying the constellation of 30 satellites to provide global coverage.
Welcome back to Startup Street. I'm Shruti Mishra. Bengaluru-based space tech startup Pixel recently raised $5 million in seed funding. Its founders, 22-year-old space enthusiasts and BITS Pilani graduates, are planning to launch Pixel's first satellite by end of this year. They believe space technology can make life on Earth better and more sustainable. To know how and the road ahead for the venture, joining me now are Pixel founders Aves Ahmed and Kshitij Khandelwal. Gentlemen, many thanks for joining us on Startup Street today. Aves, let me start with you first. You are aiming to
Well, we will have to slip into a very short break right here on Startup Street. And on the other side, we will focus on the increased adoption of remote workspace, the growing cybersecurity threats, and the questions about data governance that has significantly accelerated the demand for cloud-first approach. We bring you the co-founder and CEO of SaaS startup and unicorn Druva on the other side. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're still with us on Startup Street. Now, Sunnyvale headquartered SaaS-based cloud data protection startup Druva joined the Unicorn Club in June 2019 when it raised $130 million from Viking Global. Now, it recently has claimed to recorded one of the most successful years to date and saw a 70% year-on-year increase in its recurring revenue for its data center workload protection solution and a 50% growth in its overall data under management. Now, cloud management and migration efforts have been an ongoing trend for several years now, but the increased adoption of remote workforce, the growing ransomware threats have significantly accelerated the demand for cloud-first approach to data protection. Hence, companies like Druva are bound to witness an accelerated growth all through 2020. Joining me right now to talk about this trend is Jaspreet Singh, co-founder and CEO of Druva. Jaspreet, thank you so much for being with us right here on Startup Street. Now, in a statement issued by you recently, you just said that the spring of 2020 will forever be remembered as the inflection point of the cloud era. You seem to remember the COVID-19 and the lockdown phase in a very different way, calling it the spring of 2020.
Thank you, Megha, for having me on the call. I think yes, as an entrepreneur, as a technologist, you must, even the COVID is a pretty bad time for the industry and for everybody else around. As an entrepreneur, we must find opportunity in everything we try to address and try to do, right? So I do see, in many ways, it's a pretty bad trend, but in many ways, it's a good opportunity for a shift in business motion, especially the digitalization, especially the cloud approach, and hence you'll see our workforces, our industries change forever, given this pressure point from pandemic.
Right. You've been betting on cloud data protection since 2008 and have been helping your clients switch from traditional hardware-based architecture to the cloud. So would you call this, in terms of especially the numbers that you're seeing, a big validation for the technology that you've been betting on for so long?
Yes, and first of all, I must applaud you for giving a perfect Druva pitch. You do a better job than even myself. I think as a startup person, as an entrepreneur, you're supposed to take bets which nobody else will dare take, given the timeline. You're supposed to, put down your own conviction towards the market and understand and appreciate, what trends may be in the future. 6-7 years ago, we've transformed the business from a software business to say, hey, let's just focus everything. Even though we had revenue and customers, we made a strategic difference and bet to go towards cloud and not take on a software business go forward basis. And those bets have turned out to be very much a major winning criteria in the market. And we are the beneficiary of a market trend which is completely in our favor. We don't see cloud as a technology. We see cloud as a business narrative. And, data is incredibly important for enterprises. So is data protection. And rather than buying hardware, buying software, calling out vendors, praying God, there's a lot to do. Still, it doesn't work, or managing data is so hard, right? How do you make it incredibly simple, which gives the enterprise the power of actually having data on their fingertips all they want at a single price point across the globe, be it India, be it a Mumbai location, or be it a Sydney location, or be it a San Francisco location, the same price point, the same value, the same quality of service in a single click.
Well, as I said in my introduction, you're seeing a 70% year-on-year increase in your recurring revenue. And of course, as part of the data under management, you've seen a 50% growth overall. But what were some of the trends? Did you onboard some clients who have never used your services before? Were there any first-time users that you managed to rope in, especially during this pandemic?
So just to be clear, the press announcement was a year prior to COVID. Nonetheless, the COVID also we're seeing good growth. We're seeing better growth than we expected. I think prior to COVID, one is a business model change. Majority in our industry were asking customers to commit to several years of spending upfront by selling them a piece of hardware or engaging in a long-drawn consulting service, right? We turned the market upside down by saying pay-as-you-go, consumption-oriented buying model, that when you need data protection, where you need it, just buy as much as you need it, right? So what that did to our market is, we got exceptionally amount of new logos or new customers coming on board, but then the consumption was rapidly increasing, right, over the last 2.5, 3 years, right? So we saw a major uptick in consumption last year, and we were beneficiary of a solid growth here. Coming into COVID, we're still seeing a strong trend. We were initially very fearful, or very cautious, I would say, very cautious about what this may do to our industry, how this may turn up in terms of customers' appetite for new partners. But we were surprised by how much digitalization happened in a matter of 3 to 4 months now compared to the last several years. There was a report by saying that the internet-oriented e-commerce was growing almost 1% globally every quarter, but it had an inflection point about 4 months ago to be growing more than 4 to 5 points or even more every month, right? So similar trend happened to both digitalization of workforce, like we're on a team call right now, and also digitalization of their core data center, right? So those, I think, elements really helped Druva to sort of spring forward and go in the right direction even during COVID, and really help the customer to achieve what they wanted to do.
Right. We're witnessing a transition, and I would like to say that there are transitions that are happening parallelly, where on one side you're trying to rope in companies that bet on traditional hardware and bring them on to cloud, and at the same time you are going through an evolution of the cloud data protection industry, and all of this is happening while you're trying to still educate people about cloud and the technology that you've been working on. So talk to us about some of the changes that the industry itself saw, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic.
Many changes has happened during the COVID pandemic. It's a great question. I think first of all, the first few months we saw customers focusing on how they get their workforce productive again, right, from this work from home scenario. We saw major effort by across the industry on digitalization, around security measures, around enablement measures of their digital workforce. And I think people understood and appreciated the fact that the workforce doesn't have to be bound to a single location, a single office. Right? It has to support, where the workforce wants to work from, given the pandemic. That was a first major shift. The second major shift was, there was a physical proximity element always to your core IT infrastructure, that I must touch it, I must feed it, I must control it. Right? The notion of control was very much physical and local. Right? That was sort of cut loose, given customers now wanted their services to be online. And for their services to be online, they had to embrace new development tools, new automation tools, new hosting mechanisms, all driven by cloud. So we saw a major uptick in customers adapting new services, mostly SaaS services, driven from the cloud. And now the third trend is coming up, where security is becoming a big concern. Right? The more dispersed the data is, the more controlled your centralized control plane has to be. So from a remote workforce, from systems which are sort of in a new platform, I think security and cyber resiliency in general is something which people are paying attention to. But I do think at the end of all this thing, businesses would be much better than what they were, before COVID. They will be, hardened by a dose of immunity.
All right. Well, I won't expect you to say anything otherwise, Jaspreet, but this is one thing that we will have to see, that all the trends that you highlighted, whether it's short-term or long-term, that's something that we will only know in a post-COVID era, or as you would call it, post-spring of 2020. Jaspreet, thank you so much for joining us right here on Startup Street. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of the show, but don't go anywhere. More news and updates coming up for you on the other side. Stay tuned.